Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be doing my 2021 almost final NHL mock draft rankings. Now, these aren't the final mock draft rankings. I will probably do one a couple of weeks before the 2021 NHL draft, but these are the almost final rankings and a lot has changed since last month. We of course have the lottery done and over with. We're getting closer and closer to the NHL draft and these rankings are getting closer as well to my finalized rankings and the final top 31 eventually of this NHL draft. So, when it comes to the 2021 NHL draft, who do I see as the best prospects in the draft and which prospects make today's top 25? Watch till the end for all of my draft rankings and all of the picks and hit that subscribe button if you're new. 60% of the people that are watching videos aren't subscribed, so every bit helps. And if you like hockey and draft content just like this one, we'd love to have you in the draft game. Now, if you are new to the channel, we do two different types of mock drafts. The first one is the mock draft simulation, where we go through each team's picks and see who they might end up taking. The second one is the mock draft rankings, where we go through the top 20 or the top 25 this time around and basically rank the best prospects in each draft class. That is what we're going to be doing today. For the almost final time, there will be one final mock draft right before the 2021 draft, but this has had a lot of changes, especially in this top 25 with the World Juniors and some of the play afterwards and the World Championships. There's been a lot to digest and a lot of different rankings this time around, especially inside that top 10. But we're going to start out with the 25 and 21 picks and then go in-depth at the top 20 spots. And starting at 25, you got Dylan Duke. 24 is his teammate in Sasha Pastujov. 23 is Brent Offman moving up with quite a few spots. Oscar Olsen dropping a few spots. Carson Lambos up a spot as well to go from 25 to 21. But now we can officially get inside the top 20 where things get even juicier and especially interesting in this year's draft that has a lot of evenness and a lot of controversy. Now, although this NHL draft might be on the weaker side of things, there is still a great top 10 and maybe top 15, but especially around that 12 to 15 range where it kind of starts to drop off a little bit. And you'll see that in the top 20, but we're going to start out today in the top 20 for today's mock draft rankings and start at number 20 with Russian winger Nikita Chibrikov. Nikita Chibrikov is one of the most fascinating players of this draft. He's a really interesting, really enticing, really engaging forward that in terms of skill can basically break out a great play out of nowhere. He did that a ton in the World Juniors. He does that a ton in Russia. The skill is definitely there, but the pitfalls of Russian wingers usually come with stereotypes, and Nikita Chibrikov fits into a lot of those. The two-way game isn't where it needs to be. I think he can kind of seem like a rover sometimes, and when he doesn't have the puck, it can kind of seem like he's a useless player out there, but when he is able to make a dynamic play, he absolutely makes it and could make a team very interesting when they end up selecting him. Could go in the top 15 as well in this draft class. But then going on to number 19, we're going to move on to the first goalie of today's list. There is, of course, two, and the first one will be at number 19 in Sebastian Cossa. Sebastian Cossa is, without a doubt, if Jesper Wallstedt was not a thing, the best goaltender of the draft. Sadly for him, Jesper Wallstedt is a thing, but Sebastian Cossa is fantastic and could be one of the best Canadian goaltenders we see alongside Carter Hart over these past few seasons. He has a lot of great qualities. He's very mature, very under the radar, but he gets the job done. Very quiet for the Edmonton Oil Kings, but puts up great numbers. A true leader there, and I think it definitely, as a top 20 pick, could definitely be worth it to a team in need of a starting goaltender. Now going on to number 18, though, we're going to move on to one of my favorites in this draft class and move on to Swedish winger Isak Rosen. Isak Rosen is another player that can make a great play at any given moment, but he's a player that I think has a lot more silky abilities than a guy like Nikita Chibrikov in terms of maybe developing as a better overall player. I think Rosen's a great teammate overall. He has a lot of good qualities to him. I think his offensive game can sometimes be a little bit leaned upon, but I think it is absolutely deserved. He's a consistent, great play driving forward that does a lot for his own team, and I think at number 18, a team getting him at that spot will be a pretty fantastic pick. Now moving on to number 17, though, and easily one of the most underrated players of this draft class that that really, I think only because of his size is getting underrated. We're going to go on to number 17 and go on to my boy, Logan Stankoven. To me, Logan Stankoven should absolutely be a first-round pick, but that should be the bare minimum. Right now, a ton of outlets are having him in the second round, having it now inside of that even potentially, and I don't really see too many reasons why. Yes, he is undersized and underweighted, I guess, but he plays like a bigger forward, which is exactly what I want to see younger, kind of smaller players play like. He doesn't feel like he is a smaller player. He's always hard-nosed, always playing with a high-level intensity. His motor is one of the best in this draft, but his shot, his overall offensive abilities are very, very good for a guy his size and his age, and I think he will be a guy that could develop as a top 6 player, could kind of go in the same route as a Victor Arvidsson, perhaps. But now we're going to move on to number 16 and go on to another player that I have an absolute love for in this draft class, and go on to number 16 and QMJHL forward Xavier Bourgault. Now, Xavier Bourgault is an interesting one because although he was playing great with Maverick Bourque, when Maverick Bourque was off the team and it was just Xavier Bourgault playing, Bourgault was absolutely fantastic this year. And I think there's a lot of great qualities in Bourgault's game that I think will translate to the NHL level, unlike some other QMJHLers, let's say. I think his overall pace of play might be the biggest issue, but his puck handling, his passing, his vision is just exceptional. And I think especially on a power play one day will be an absolute monster. But now we can officially get inside the top 15 for the almost final 2021 NHL mock draft. And now we're going to go to another guy that I just absolutely adore. And we're going to move on to Russian centerman Fyodor Svechkov. Fyodor Svechkov is a fascinating player and is one of the best centers of this draft, in my opinion. A guy that has a lot of NHL quality traits already, and is a guy that in terms of maturity, in terms of likelihood of being a center, he's one of the best bets you can make in this draft, and probably is one of the more safe ones too. Even though he will still need some patience, I think, until he gets to the NHL level, he's a great overall two-way force, and especially in the neutral zone, in terms of efficiency, he's one of the most interesting and non-complex prospects in this draft. You know what you're getting in Fyodor Svechkov, and I think he's a player that will probably go in this year's top 20. But now we're going to move on to number 14, and talking about efficiency and talking about great potential centers, we can now move on to number 14 and go to Finnish centerman Aatu Räty. Now, Räty's been way up my rankings, way down my rankings all the time, and it's just about philosophy when it comes to Räty. At the end of the day, he's a guy that in terms of being a likely middle six player is one of the most likely of this draft class. His defensive instincts are simply exceptional. His puck retrieval ability is great, but the offensive game has kind of stalled a little bit since that 2019 season in Finland. But if that can get back to a good pace and a team in the right position is able to develop him that way, his defensive game is already NHL ready, I think, and the efficiency and the way he processes the game, I think, is also NHL ready. He'll be a very, very good player. It's just a matter of how good he'll be at the NHL level. Now we can move on to number 13, though, and go to a guy that's dropped not only because of his own play, but just because other players have passed him. And now moving on to another player I love in Cole Sillinger. Cole Sillinger is a guy that, as a Dallas Stars fan, I really want at 14th overall. Has some just absolutely silky skill. And again, one of those players that can make anything happen at any given moment. And although there is some pace of play issues, sometimes it feels like he doesn't even want to play in the USHL at times, which I can get. But when it comes to the offensive game and what he can pull off at a moment's notice, he has so many tools in his magician's hat. It's absolutely fantastic. His shot is incredible. His wrister is sensational. His passing is super underrated. His vision is just sublime. He has a lot of great assets, and I think a team that needs an offensive forward will definitely love what they get in Cole Sillinger. Now we're going to move on to number 12, though, and I'm going to stop gushing about Cole Sillinger and move on to American sniper Chaz Lucius. Chaz Lucius is a guy that I think will go in the top 15 of this draft, and rightfully so. Came back from a pretty bad injury, but was exceptional. Got over a goal per game in the USDP, and I think was playing a lot better than what I might have expected, especially coming back from that injury. His skating was a big issue to me, especially when it came to the pace of play. I think that was kind of holding his game back, but I did see some improvements there when he came back in the USDP, and I think he will be a player that, especially next year in the World Juniors for Team USA, will have a huge impact on that team, and I would not be surprised if he even goes in the top 10 of this year's draft. Now we can move on to number 11, the last pick outside the top 10, and go to a guy that many people are having in the top 5 of this draft, not just in terms of rankings, but in terms of their simulations, and a guy that's been heavily rising as of late, that being Mason McTavish. McTavish is a fascinating player in the ways that he is getting hyped. I don't think he's a very complicated player at all. He has a lot of solid traits, nothing that absolutely stands out, but it's a great blend of creativity, a great blend of offensive instincts. He just knows how to process the game at a very intelligent and very, very solid level. And as a center, I think that's also helping him a lot. He had a great World Juniors, and that's also helping him. And although I don't see the top 10 hype, I think he will be a very good NHL player and could be a very serviceable second-line center in the NHL someday. But now we can officially get inside the top 10, and we're going to start out the top 10 with Swedish goaltender Jesper Wallstedt. Jesper Wallstedt, you guys know, is one of my favorite prospects of this draft, and in my opinion, the best goaltending prospect since Andrei Vasilevsky, if I'm being real. And even though he has fallen a little bit for me, I think it's just because other players have risen above him in terms of potential value. But when it comes to Jesper Wallstedt, if he does pan out, he could be one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. His maturity is fantastic. His calmness under pressure is sensational. He's a great character, great leader. Again, calm under pressure, but his fundamentals are some of the strongest I've ever seen of any goaltender. He will be absolutely okay, and it could be in the NHL by the same time around Spencer Knight is at, like 20 or 21 years old. You might not have to wait too long until Wallstedt is a serviceable, at least, NHL goalie. But now we're going to move on to number 9 and go on to one of the most complex prospects of this draft for sure, and go to a guy that I've gone back and forth on a ton as maybe a top 3 pick. At 9, he will go at this spot though. I'm gonna go with British Columbia native Kent Johnson. I know a lot of people will probably have him higher, but the more I watch Kent Johnson, the more I think it's maybe a little bit more work that it might be cut out for. Still, Kent Johnson has some of the most creative, some of the best handling skills, some of the most interesting ways of perceiving the game of this entire draft. But I think, again, the complexness of his game kind of holds him back a little bit. I mentioned it in the last mock draft, but he is playing 8D chess when the NHL and hockey itself is 4D chess. He is constantly thinking and almost overthinking at times. Now we're going to move on to number 8, though, and go on to Dylan Guenther, a guy that also has kind of been going up and down for me, but I think at number 8 is pretty much where he'll stay. He had a decent World Juniors, pretty much average. A great start of the WHL campaign, though. To me, the offensive check marks are absolutely there. It's just a question of how, again, that size, how that pace of play will translate to the NHL level. He's not a fantastic skater, and he is a little bit undersized, and he kind of plays like it. He's not too physical, and I think it might be a little bit more patience needed with Dylan Guenther than some people might expect, especially if you're drafting him in the top 5. But now we're going to move on to number 7, a guy that I've gone as well back and forth on, you guys know. But he comes in at number 7 and is actually, I think, the highest he's ever been in the mock drafts. We're now going to move on to Swedish D-man, Simon Edvinsson. Simon Edvinsson, again, is one of the most fascinating and boomer bust prospects of this draft. He could easily be the best prospect of this draft or be the biggest bust inside the top 10. We pretty much know he will go top 10, though, and I think there are some good reasons for that. His defensive game is really, really strong for a player that size. He uses his physical game pretty well as well in the neutral zone play. Although it can get kind of contrived, there is a lot of potential there. But the problem becomes, again, that's just the decision-making that can be so confusing, especially in the neutral zone, but even offensively, there's a lot of times where you'll just be kind of dazed by what he is trying to do out there. But you could see it in the World Juniors, especially as that tourney progressed. He has the talent, and I think if he does pan out, he could be a top pairing D-man. That's a big if, but if it does, a team getting him, especially at number 7, would get a pretty good steal. But we're going to continue the trend of Swedish-born players and move on to number 6, and I'm going to go with my guy, Fabian Lysell. Fabian Lysell is a guy that right now seems to have a lot of stock going against him, and there's been some character concerns there. To me, I don't really put too much stock in it, and from what I've heard, it isn't even that big of a deal. But when we look at the actual player himself in Fabian Lysell, I'm willing to bet he could be one of the best forwards of this draft. In terms of the play playmaking, in terms of the actual decision-making, he is one of the most intense and one of the most fast players of this draft. His skating is pretty great for his size. He actually has some good physical and forechecking game to him as well, which I think makes him super hard to play against. I could totally see a situation where Lysell is a first-line player and makes a lot of people silly for having him outside the top 10 or even the top 15. But now moving on to number 5, inside the top 5 for the almost final 2021 NHL mock draft. I'm going to go to number 5, and I'm just going to say it. It's going to be Canadian D-man Brandt Clarke. Now, Brandt Clarke did move down a spot, and the World Juniors were kind of just average for him. He started off great, but as the tournament went on, he was kind of less of a factor for Team Canada, but I still think he can become a top-pairing D-man in the NHL. His transitional ability is simply amazing. His skating gets him out of so many situations, it's almost a little bit concerning, but his overall offensive game, I think, has a lot of potential in the power play, in the offensive zone. He is really creative, really deceptive, and I think he used that to his advantage. The problem comes, I think, in terms of the defensive consistencies, especially when it comes to his physical game, that can sometimes seem outmatched. But if he gains some more muscle, gets some more body on him, and plays a more rugged game, I think Brandt Clarke could have a lot of value in the NHL. Now we're going to move on to number 4, though, and go on to one of my favorites in Luke Hughes, a guy that, although he had a season-ending injury, it doesn't look like it'll be too much of a factor, but just betting on the skill of Luke Hughes, I think, is a wise choice in the top 5. His skating is one of the best in this draft. He's one of the most fit players of this draft. His consistency is absolutely fantastic. His work ethic is simply unmatched. He's a guy, though, in terms of puck movement, in terms of passing, in terms of making the right play, he has a little more of a simple game than some defensemen, but I think that definitely works out for him. He'll be a great overall two-way defenseman, I think, and the defensive potential there, although wasn't really tapped too much this year, I think has a lot of potential in the NHL going forward. If he does go to New Jersey, that would not be too bad either. But now we're going to move on to number 3, inside the top 3, and coming in at the 3rd spot, I'm going to go with Swedish forward William Eklund. William Eklund, I could also see, again, there's so many players in this draft that I could see being the best prospect of the draft. William Eklund is definitely one of those. Had an incredible SHL season for the first half, and once he got coronavirus in the second half, it kind of started to slow down, but he was still playing pretty well. But in that first half, he was outplaying guys like Alexander Holtz, outplaying a ton of SHL teams, and he was just absolutely seeing, or we were absolutely seeing what William Eklund's potential could be during that run. His playmaking was exceptional. His play driving was at an elite rate. His defensive game wasn't really a slouch either, and he was creating chances, keeping play going, and kind of playing like a Colorado Avalanche top 6 winger, which I think a lot of teams will absolutely love to have. But now we're going to move on to the 2nd and number 1 spot between the 2 Michigan Wolverines and Matthew Beniers and Owen Power. And you guys know I go back and forth between these two guys, and honestly, if you have either of these guys at number 1, I could totally see why. But we're going to go on to number 2 and the 2nd best prospect of the 2021 NHL draft, and I'm going to move on once again to Canadian D-man Owen Power. I will say this, he has had a really strong World Championships, and I think that is definitely a great sign for maybe being ready for the NHL this next year. I'm not 100% sure about it, but I think it is looking a little bit better. But when it comes to Owen Power, the potential is there to be the best defenseman and the best player of this draft. His skating is fantastic for his size. His size is fantastic for a guy potentially there, where he uses his physical game, and I think he could become a number 1 D-man. It's just how likely is that to happen? I think defensively, sometimes this year, again, he's made some pretty bad mistakes under pressure. He wasn't really all that great for Michigan, and I think the physical game could definitely take a few next steps. He kind of reminds me of Quinton Byfield, where he has the size to be a great physical player, but he just never really seemed to know what to do with his body. But once I think he fills out that frame, once he gets comfortable, and let's hope the Buffalo Sabres have patience with him, he could be a great player and definitely worthy of a top 2 pick. But now moving on to number 1, finally, to end it all, the best player in the 2021 draft, I would say slightly, but I think he is at number 1 for me still. I'm going to move on to Matthew Beniers. Now, Matthew Beniers is not likely to go first overall, probably in the top 3, maybe to Seattle, maybe to Anaheim, but to me, Matthew Beniers is the best prospect of this draft, and I've had him at number 1 for a few months now, and it's for a lot of different reasons. Really, there is no hole to Matthew Beniers' game, and I think that's the only prospect in this draft that I can say that confidently. He, in my opinion, is the most NHL-ready player of the draft. He just has incredible smarts, incredible awareness of the game, knows where to be at all times. Kind of reminds me of Anton Lundell, where in terms of positionally, he is always in the right spot to do anything creative, anything good for his team. Defensively, he's fantastic. In the neutral zone, he absolutely keeps the puck away at all costs. And offensively, he keeps play going. He's a simple player and effective. That is Matthew Beniers' game. You won't see a ton of flash. You won't see the goal of the season, but you will see a fantastic player that does all the right things for your team. I think a team that gets him the top 3, the top 5 will definitely be happy, and Matthew Beniers, I think, is the #1 in 2021. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Comment down below what you agree and disagree with, and who do you see as the best prospects in the 2021 NHL Draft. Let me know all your thoughts. Make sure you share this video with your friends, get the mock draft out there, and click on this card for all my 2021 NHL Draft content. My name is Nathan. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.